What kind of wickedness, what sort of darkness could lead God to destroy not just one, but two entire cities with fire from the heavens? This isn't just some ancient legend, it's a serious warning, a message that still speaks to us today. Sodom and Gomorrah were once busy, thriving places. They had homes, markets, families, people who lived their everyday lives just like us. But something went terribly wrong. The hearts of the people grew hard and distant. Their behavior became so evil, so corrupt, that they sank into a level of sin that even God could no longer allow. Despite his mercy and patience, God sent two angels to give the people a final warning. But instead of showing respect or kindness, the men of Sodom tried to hurt them. That very night, a tragic and final choice was made. God's decision was firm, and suddenly, fire and burning sulfur fell from the sky, wiping the cities away in an instant. Nothing survived. No homes, no trees, no people, only smoke rising from the ruins where life once had been. But what were the crimes that led to such terrible judgment? What could have been so offensive that it brought about the complete destruction of these cities? Was it just the actions of a few, or was there something deeper? These sins aren't just from ancient times, they still exist today, hidden in plain sight. In this video, we're going to look closely at the 5 main sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. And you might be surprised to see how closely they reflect the world around us now. What do these sins teach us about human behavior? And how can we avoid the same mistakes that led to these cities' downfall? Type 777 in the comments if you're ready to uncover the hidden truths behind what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah and learn how these lessons still apply to us today. Keep watching, because what we're about to explore might just change how you view the world. Are you ready to begin? Let's dive in. The 5 major sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why God destroyed them. Rampant sexual sin. In the heart of ancient Sodom, sin had spread so deeply that it touched every corner of life. This is a story meant to serve as a warning for every generation. In Genesis 19, we read about 2 angels sent by God to visit Sodom, appearing as ordinary men. Lot, a man who still tried to live righteously despite the corruption around him, invited them into his home. But that night, as darkness covered the city, something terrible happened. The men of Sodom, young and old alike, gathered at Lot's house, surrounding it like a violent mob. Their voices rose, driven by wicked desire, as they demanded Lot hand over his visitors. They didn't want to meet them politely. Their aim was to violate them, to treat them in a way that had nothing to do with hospitality. In the Bible, the word "no" here speaks to something far darker than a simple greeting or introduction. It points to a violent and immoral act, one meant to strip away dignity and humanity. The men of Sodom had no interest in kindness, respect, or welcoming strangers. They were driven by a desire for dominance, power, and control. Their actions weren't only fueled by lust, they showed a total disregard for human dignity and the value of life itself. These visitors weren't ordinary people, they were divine messengers sent by God. Yet the people of Sodom showed no respect, no reverence, not even toward beings sent from heaven. They were prepared to dishonor the sacred tradition of hospitality, which had been a foundation of ancient cultures. Today, can we honestly say, we haven't seen similar attitudes in a world where boundaries are ignored, where respect disappears, and people cross moral lines without thinking? In Sodom, the beautiful gift God had given, sexuality, was twisted into something dark, something used to degrade and harm. God's purpose for human sexuality was pure, intended as a reflection of love and commitment. But in Sodom, it had been corrupted into a shameful distortion of God's intentions. Don't we see hints of this same decay in the world today? Society often treats purity and respect as things to laugh at, celebrating behaviors that go against God's commands. We live in a time when lines are blurred, and what is sacred is often ridiculed. It's tempting to dismiss this as just a story from ancient times. But think, what happens to a society that stops valuing what is pure and holy? How far can moral decay spread before God says, "Enough"? The people of Sodom sealed their own fate through their hardened hearts. They had long abandoned what was right and, blinded by pride, ignored the consequences of their choices. When they stopped honoring God and no longer respected life itself, God took action. This account stands as a powerful reminder that there are consequences when people turn away from what is sacred. The real question is, will we learn from their downfall or repeat their mistakes? Ultimately, this isn't about blaming others, but about realizing the danger of slowly giving in to moral compromise. It's a warning meant to make us think about our own actions, our choices, and the world we shape together. How often do we test the limits of what's right, even in small ways? How often do we turn our backs on what is sacred until we can no longer find our way? God's judgment on Sodom was harsh, but it was also fair. It wasn't rushed. It came after generations of warnings, and Sodom and Gomorrah became examples of what happens when sin reaches its peak. Their destruction reminds us of how powerful moral decay can be, and why it's so important to hold on to what is good and holy. As we examine our own lives and communities, we must ask ourselves, are we walking down that same path? What do we stand for, and are we ready to protect what is pure, sacred, and good? The decision is ours to make. Like Lot, we are called to remain faithful, even if the world around us falls deeper into moral darkness. 2. Pride and arrogance were the second major sins that led to Sodom's downfall. Their arrogance ran so deep that it kept them from seeing the moral decay right in front of them. Long after Sodom's destruction, the prophet Ezekiel offered more clarity about the reasons behind their fall. He wrote, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were proud, had plenty of food, and lived without concern for others." Ezekiel 16:49 paraphrased. These words reflect the deep spiritual and moral failure of a people who seemed to have everything but lacked what mattered most. Pride is a powerful and dangerous force. It doesn't always show itself loudly. Often, it works quietly beneath the surface, gradually poisoning a society from the inside until it collapses. The people of Sodom were proud, consumed by their wealth and comfort. They believed they were unstoppable, superior to others. They had more than enough food, riches, and leisure. Yet instead of using their abundance to help others or honor God, they became selfish. They looked down on the weak and the poor, believing they were better than everyone else. This arrogance hardened their hearts, blinding them to the virtues of humility, kindness, and compassion. It's easy to see how a wealthy, comfortable society could fall into such arrogance. Haven't we witnessed pride taking hold in our world today? When life feels good, when blessings surround us, it's easy to forget who provided those blessings. We start to believe we've earned it all ourselves, that we don't need anyone, not even God. Yet the Bible repeatedly warns us about the dangers of this mindset. Consider the fall of Babylon. Scripture tells us that Babylon's pride led to its downfall. They said, "I am, and there is no one else. I will never be left alone or suffer." Isaiah 47:8 paraphrased. But in a single night, Babylon collapsed. The same was true for Egypt, which rose to greatness in pride, only to be humbled by God. Even King Nebuchadnezzar had to face humiliation, driven to madness because of his pride, until he finally recognized God's supreme authority after years of hardship. Pride always finds a way to sneak in, inflating our sense of self-worth, convincing us we don't need anyone's help. This illusion of strength is dangerous because it pulls us further from God. As pride filled the hearts of Sodom's people, they began to think they were beyond judgment, too powerful to face consequences. But the tragedy of pride is that it blinds us to our own emptiness. Sodom's people believed they had it all: wealth, pleasure, influence. Yet they were empty inside, completely unaware of how deeply they needed God. It's a sobering thought. Don't we often see these same patterns around us today, or even in our own lives? When we trust in riches, reputation, or temporary comforts, we risk becoming like Sodom, blinded by arrogance and lost in the false belief that we can stand on our own. How much have we allowed pride to influence the way we live? Do we depend more on our own strength and possessions than on God's care? The story of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a clear warning about the danger of pride. In their arrogance, the people of Sodom believed they were safe from any consequence, but God's judgment arrived swiftly, and their fall was devastating. Pride always comes before ruin, and God humbles those who refuse to acknowledge their need for Him. Let this serve as a reminder, not only of a city's fall long ago, but of the quiet danger pride poses within each of us today. Are we watching for it? Are we humble enough to admit that without God we are nothing? Or are we following the path of Sodom, living in abundance yet becoming spiritually empty? The third major sin that brought about Sodom's downfall was their complete failure to show hospitality. In ancient times, hospitality wasn't just about being polite or kind. It was considered a sacred duty, deeply rooted in the values of society. When travelers arrived in a town, it was expected that people would provide them with food, water, a place to rest, and protection. This practice came from a shared understanding of humanity's need for connection, compassion, and care for those who were vulnerable. To welcome a stranger was to honor them as someone sent by God, as divine presence was often believed to come in the form of travelers. But in Sodom, the reality was the exact opposite. When two angels, appearing as ordinary men, came into the city, the people of Sodom, young and old alike, gathered outside Lot's home. Instead of showing kindness, they surrounded the house, demanding Lot hand over his guests. Their purpose was not hospitality. They meant to harm, to abuse, and to shame those who had come seeking refuge. A visit that should have been peaceful, a chance for simple human kindness, became a night filled with fear and cruelty. Those who should have offered protection chose violence against innocent visitors. This wasn't just an act of disrespect, it was a deeply evil choice. The sin of Sodom in this moment wasn't only in breaking social expectations, but in defying something far greater: God's command to show love, care, and protection to others. Hospitality, in God's eyes, reflects His very nature. God welcomes the stranger and shelters the weak. Throughout the Old Testament, God's people are reminded again and again to offer kindness and generosity to those in need, as seen in scriptures like Hebrews 13:2, which teaches, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without realizing it." Paraphrased. So when the people of Sodom chose violence over kindness, they weren't just ignoring social customs. They were directly opposing the way God calls us to treat others. Their failure wasn't just about lacking politeness, it was a rejection of God's very nature. God places great importance on hospitality because it reflects His love and care for all people. When His people ignore this act of compassion, they fail to represent His character in the world. It's a serious thought, isn't it? How often do we overlook the importance of hospitality in our lives today? Are we willing to welcome strangers, to show kindness and offer help? Or have we shut ourselves off from the people around us? The way we treat others, especially those we don't know, speaks volumes about the state of our hearts. In a world filled with division, suspicion, and judgment, the simple act of welcoming others is far more than kindness. It's a sign that our hearts are aligned with God's. The people of Sodom failed this test in the worst way. They didn't just turn strangers away, they violently attacked them. They had no understanding of the sacred responsibility they ignored, and by rejecting this, they sealed their own destruction. Their lack of hospitality wasn't a small oversight. It revealed the true condition of their hearts. When we withhold hospitality, we might not realize it. But we are rejecting God's command to love others as He loves us. What about us today? How do we treat those who are different, those who are in need, those who feel like outsiders? Do we offer kindness, a helping hand, or do we turn away, focused on our own safety and comfort, while ignoring those around us? Sodom's example challenges us to examine how we respond to others who need compassion. In today's world, where people are often pushed aside and overlooked, this story calls us to make a choice. Are our hearts open to others, or have we closed them? Do we reflect God's heart of hospitality, or has the spirit of Sodom found a place in our lives? The fourth major sin that led to Sodom's downfall was their mistreatment of the poor and vulnerable. Once again, the prophet Ezekiel speaks clearly about this serious failure. Along with their pride and abundance, Sodom was guilty of ignoring the needs of the weak, the struggling, and the forgotten. Ezekiel wrote, "They did not help the poor and needy." Ezekiel 16:49 paraphrased. This isn't just a statement about their wealth. It is a clear condemnation of their refusal to show compassion to those who needed it most. All through Scripture, God shows how deeply He cares for the poor, the helpless, and the outcast. Time and again, He commands His people to feed the hungry, protect the widow, and care for the orphan. Isaiah 1:17. These aren't suggestions for rare occasions. These are essential truths in God's kingdom. Caring for those who are vulnerable is not just a minor detail in the Bible. It shows us the very nature of God's heart. God's sense of justice and His kindness are tightly connected, and because of this, He expects us to help those who cannot help themselves. Yet in Sodom, this important duty was completely neglected. The people there had great wealth, plenty of food, and more than enough resources. They had everything they needed to be generous, but they chose not to open their hearts or their hands to those in need. Rather than offering kindness, they shut their homes and their hearts to the vulnerable. This was no accident. It was a clear decision to live in comfort while others suffered around them. The people of Sodom felt no sympathy for the poor, and this rejection of compassion made God very angry. Why? Because when we turn our backs on those in need, we are not just turning away from people. We are turning our backs on God Himself. He has chosen to stand with the poor, the rejected, and those without a voice. This is not only about individual wrongdoing. It is about the failure of society as a whole. God's judgment doesn't only come to individuals for personal sins. It also falls upon communities or nations that refuse to act with fairness, who forget kindness, and who let the poor suffer while others live in comfort. We see this throughout Israel's history and in the stories of other nations. When Israel mistreated the poor or ignored justice, God sent prophets to warn them. In Ezekiel 22-29, God accuses Israel's leaders of stealing from and harming the poor and helpless. Edom, Tyre, and other nations received the same punishment when they refused to listen to the cries of those who suffered. What happened in Sodom wasn't just about personal mistakes. It was a breakdown of the entire society, where injustice and selfishness became normal. Sodom, in its pride, forgot that blessings come with responsibility, that those who live with plenty should help those in need. Isn't this still true today? We live in a world where poverty, hunger, and suffering are everywhere. Every day, we hear about people lacking food, shelter, healthcare, and safety. How many times are we in a position to help but decide not to? How often do we ignore the pain we see around us, thinking it is not our concern? The reality is, when we choose not to act, when we turn away from those who suffer, we are repeating the same mistakes as Sodom. We share their failure to care for others. Consider this. If we have the ability to help, whether through time, money, or influence, and choose not to, what does that reveal about us? Are we living in a way that shows God's love for justice and kindness? The people of Sodom had all they needed to help, but they chose selfishness. They lived in comfort while others had nothing. How often do we do the same? When we overlook injustice, we become part of the problem that allows it to continue. God invites us to live by higher values, to show kindness to the poor and defend those who are mistreated, to practice compassion and fairness in our daily lives. As you think about this, ask yourself, how are you helping those who are struggling? Does your life reflect God's desire for justice? Are you keeping your heart open to those who are vulnerable, or are you closing yourself off with selfishness? The story of Sodom isn't merely an ancient account of destruction. It serves as a timeless reminder for everyone. The final and most decisive sin that led to the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah was their defiance of God and their refusal to repent. This wasn't simply about poor decisions. It was about outright rebellion against their Creator. The people of Sodom didn't sin because they didn't know better or because they were weak. They were proud of their wrongdoing. They had no intention of changing, no feelings of regret, and no desire to turn away from their sins. They stubbornly held on to their rebellion, ignoring every invitation to change. This attitude, more than anything else, deeply saddened God. In His kindness, God gave them time. He sent warnings. He even allowed Abraham to speak on their behalf, pleading with God to spare the cities if just 10 righteous people could be found. But despite Abraham's sincere requests, not even 10 righteous individuals were present. Think about how striking that is. A city so overcome by wickedness that there weren't even a few people striving to do what was right. This wasn't merely a personal failure, but a widespread moral collapse. An entire society had turned so far from righteousness that goodness was nearly impossible to find. Lot, who lived among them, even tried to warn his sons-in-law. He begged them to leave before disaster struck, but they only laughed at him. They thought his warnings were absurd, unable to grasp how serious the situation truly was. Surely nothing bad would happen, they must have told themselves. They ignored every chance to turn back, dismissed every opportunity to change direction. How often do we see people today who brush off warnings, who scoff at the idea of consequences, believing life will continue unchanged no matter what signs appear around them? Yet it wasn't just a few individuals in Sodom who ignored these warnings. It was the entire community, a society whose hearts had become hardened against God's calls to change. Even when angels came to reveal the truth, they refused to listen. They continued on in darkness, unwilling or unable to recognize the light. This is what truly broke God's heart. He is patient, slow to anger, and full of mercy. He offers chance after chance. But there comes a moment when, if people continue to resist, judgment will come. And that is exactly what happened. After all the opportunities to turn back, the time for mercy came to an end. Fire and burning sulfur fell from the sky, and the cities were destroyed. Places once full of life became lifeless ruins. Streets that once echoed with laughter. Homes that had been filled with warmth. Neighborhoods alive with activity. All of it was reduced to ashes. Even now, isn't it true that God keeps giving us opportunities? Every new day is a fresh chance to turn from rebellion and walk towards Him. How many times do we waste the chances we are given? How often do we ignore the warnings, convinced that we are untouchable, that any consequences are far away, or that there's still plenty of time? The account of Sodom and Gomorrah teaches us that there comes a moment when warnings stop, when the opportunity to change ends and judgment arrives. As Lot and his family escaped the city, they were given a clear command: do not look back, run to save yourselves. The instruction was simple but vital: flee the destruction and don't turn around. That sinful city had no place in their future. Yet, during their escape, something tragic occurred. Lot's wife, despite all the warnings, looked back. Though her body had left the city, her heart remained connected to it. She yearned for the life she was leaving behind. In that instant, she was turned into a pillar of salt. Her story painfully shows the danger of holding on to sin. Even when we are offered freedom, when we are given the chance to leave behind what enslaved us, we must resist the urge to turn back. Looking back shows a desire for what once led us to ruin. It reminds us that repentance is not just about moving away from sin with our actions. It requires our hearts to turn away as well. How often in our own lives do we struggle between the old life we are called to abandon and the new life God is offering us? How often do we cling to the past, even though God is calling us forward into something greater? The story of Lot's wife stands as a warning to us all. Her failure to completely let go of Sodom caused her downfall. She needed to release her past in order to fully receive the future God had planned, but she could not. That is the sorrow of rebellion. This final refusal to repent in Sodom, even when the signs were clear, led to their end. God's patience came to an end. His judgment was quick, but it was fair. The cities were completely destroyed. Yet the true tragedy wasn't just the physical devastation, but the spiritual ruin of a people who would not listen. The question we face is this: will we listen? Will we turn from our own rebellion, or will we, like Sodom's people, ignore the warnings until it's too late? God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah was final. Those cities, once filled with energy, wealth, and pleasure, ceased to exist because they would not listen. Their sins reached their limit, and God's patience ended. Fire and burning sulfur fell from the sky, turning what was once a lively city into nothing but smoke and ashes. The people had been offered every opportunity to change, every chance to walk away from their evil. Still, they refused. They kept living in arrogance, rebellion, and opposition to God's ways. In the end, their refusal to listen brought about their downfall. Though this story might seem like something from long ago, it's important to understand that the same sins which brought destruction to Sodom are still present in our world today. We continue to witness sexual immorality that crosses boundaries, as society praises actions that go against God's purpose for humanity. We still wrestle with pride, telling ourselves we don't need God and believing we can live without His guidance. We still fail to show kindness to strangers, neglecting the command to welcome those who are different from us. We still overlook the poor and the vulnerable, forgetting that God's heart is always with the oppressed and forgotten. And perhaps most tragically, many people still choose to live in rebellion, ignoring God's voice, turning away from His warnings and His call to turn back to Him. Yet there is a truth we cannot forget. God does not change. He remains fair and righteous. He continues to care deeply for the broken and those who suffer. And though His justice is sure, His mercy is still offered to anyone willing to come back to Him. Just as God sent His angels to warn Sodom, He continues even today to send messengers to share His truth, offer His mercy, and provide every opportunity for us to leave behind our wrongdoing. Before destruction came upon Sodom, God gave them time. He gave them chances, but they would not listen. The lesson is unmistakable. God's patience is real, but it will not last forever. His justice will come, but so will His mercy if we approach Him with a heart willing to change. After the devastating fall of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his daughters began their difficult journey to a small town called Zoar. Because of God's kindness, Zoar was spared from the judgment that had wiped out the other cities. Lot and his family found refuge there. However, their sense of security was short-lived. Lot, filled with fear and unsure of Zoar's future, began to worry that this city might suffer the same destruction as Sodom and Gomorrah. Troubled by this fear, he decided to leave Zoar behind and take his family to the safety of a cave hidden in the mountains. Genesis 19:30. What could have been a time of healing and new beginnings instead became the start of a tragic decline. But this is more than just a story of fleeing danger and surviving. It serves as a serious reminder of what can happen when we fail to fully turn away from sin, even after being rescued from it. Lot's life took a heartbreaking turn. Alone in the cave with his daughters, surrounded by fear and isolation, they were haunted by a single thought. The destruction of Sodom had wiped out their future. Without men to continue the family line, they felt hopeless. In their desperation, Lot's daughters came up with a plan. They chose to get their father drunk, and while he was in that state, they each slept with him, hoping to conceive children who would continue their family's lineage. From these actions, 2 sons were born, Moab and Ben-Ammi. These sons became the founders of the Moabite and Ammonite peoples, nations that would later oppose Israel for generations. Genesis 19:36-38. This sad account is not only about moral failure, but also shows how the consequences of sin can continue long after rescue. Even though Lot and his daughters had escaped the fiery destruction of Sodom, the emotional wounds, the fear left unchecked, and the moral collapse still followed them. Despite having experienced God's mercy and deliverance, their inability to let go of fear and sin led them down a harmful path. Though saved, they still had to deal with the effects of past choices. The Bible does not clearly tell us Lot's reaction after this heartbreaking event with his daughters. However, we can consider his state based on what happened afterward. After fleeing to the cave and enduring this shameful incident, Lot's response isn't recorded. This silence might point to deep sorrow, perhaps shame or regret over what had happened. Yet, the following events show that Lot did not undergo a complete transformation. Though rescued from Sodom's destruction, the mental scars and the wrong actions within his family left lasting marks. Even after being spared, Lot faced the lasting impact of choices beyond his control. A notable detail is that Lot chose to live away from cities after this, leading a lonely and secluded life. Still, this story reminds us that the consequences of sin are not always erased, even when one escapes immediate ruin. It's possible Lot's reaction after this might have been one of hopelessness or resignation, but it teaches us an important lesson about sin and redemption. Even if we are saved, true healing and lasting change require more than just survival. They demand transformation deep within. Lot's story with his daughters shows us that while God's mercy saves us from destruction, real healing needs a change of heart. Salvation isn't only about avoiding punishment. It calls us to a deeper change, to let go of old patterns, fears, and behaviors. God's rescue from disaster is an opportunity not just to survive, but to live renewed, to grow, and to walk in obedience. What took place in that cave is a powerful warning about how our actions, even after receiving God's grace, can still be shaped by the unresolved struggles we carry with us. Lot's ongoing fear and his daughter's moral failure reveal the inner battles we often face after being freed from sin. Though God can rescue us from disaster, it is up to us to leave behind our old ways and allow His work to change our hearts completely. This story serves as a strong reminder that, even when God shows us kindness and leads us to safety, our fight against sin does not simply end. Salvation is not a one-time event, but a continuous journey of leaving behind our old ways and accepting the new life that God offers us. Lot's story teaches us that even after being saved, we must stay alert and mindful. We need to let God change our hearts, freeing us from the fears and sins that once held us down. Only when we truly leave the past behind can we enjoy the freedom that comes with salvation. As we think about this story, we should ask ourselves, are we really moving forward? Are we letting God shape our hearts? Or are we still holding on to the same sins and fears that used to trap us? God's grace is available, but we must fully accept it and allow Him to complete His work in us. This message isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake us up. It urges us to think deeply about our lives, our communities, and our hearts. How often do we repeat the mistakes of Sodom? How often do we let pride, selfishness, or laziness blind us? How often do we ignore the things that matter most to God? The choices we make today have real effects, not just for us, but also for those around us. Though God is merciful, He calls us to listen, to change, and to turn back to Him. We are just as vulnerable to temptation and failure as Sodom once was. How often do we witness unfairness and stay silent? How often do we cling to pride, thinking we're above correction or safe from judgment? The story of Sodom challenges us to examine ourselves and ask tough questions about the condition of our hearts. So let me ask you, what part of this story stood out most to you? Was it the danger of pride, the call to defend the weak and poor, or the urgent need to turn to God before it's too late? Are there parts of your life that need to change? Is there something in your heart you should walk away from so you can fully accept God's mercy and truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your reflections. Together we can learn from history and make wiser choices for our future. If this message has touched you, please give it a like, share it, and subscribe for more honest biblical teachings and valuable lessons. Don't let this moment slip away. Let's use this time to think, to change, and to seek God's mercy while we still can. God is calling us to live in His truth and let His mercy shape us into who He wants us to be. Let's learn from the past before we repeat it. Today, let's choose to turn to God, to live with intention, and to follow His path. Time is short. Let's not waste it.